Hi everybody, welcome back for the second part of chapter 2. The beginning of chapter 2 was all about Much Afraid and the shepherd starting toward the high place, and then the shepherd went away and he left her with two companions. Do you remember what their names are? One is Sorrow and the other was Suffering. And remember, we talked yesterday about how nobody wants sorrow and suffering to be their companions. Everybody would prefer joy and peace. But Jesus knows what's best. And sometimes he asks us to keep companion with sorrow and suffering. Hashtag is still in time out because she's the naughty little dog. So we're just here. If you want to pause and grab a drink, or if you want to grab your pet or a stuffed animal, you can. All right, chapter 2, the second part. From the very beginning, the mountains were steeper than Much Afraid could handle on her own. It wasn't very long until she reached out for her helpers. Each time she took hold of the hand of either Sorrow or Suffering, a sharp pain went through her. But once she held on tightly, their hands felt very strong. They seemed to be able to pull and even lift her up and over places that she thought looked impossible. It was not very long, too, before she realized that she needed their help in another way. To her surprise and distress, there were enemies along the way. You see, back down in the valley, that had been Much Afraid's home, all her fearing relatives were very upset. To think that she had escaped from the valley and actually gone off to the mountains with the shepherd they hated so much. Ugly, crippled little Much Afraid. Why should she get to go and live on the high places? Oh, wow. Look at this guy. He looks like Gaston. Do you think so? Maybe she would even be given to a place of service in the palace of the great king himself. It was not that they wanted to go to the mountains themselves, but it was terrible to think of Much Afraid going. They had a big meeting to decide how they could capture her and bring her back to the valley to be their slave. But how could they do that? She was under the protection of the great shepherd. Somehow, they would have to trick her into wanting to return for herself. Finally, it was decided they would send a distant cousin to try. He was strong and powerful and very handsome. His name was Pride. He would be the best one to coax Much Afraid away from the shepherd, and he would not give up easily. See, this is what Pride looks like. It's not a very good thing, is it? He would be the best one to coax Much Afraid away from the shepherd, and he would not give up easily. He would be too proud to return to the valley without her, so the matter was settled. Much Afraid and her helpers had been on their journey for only a few days. One morning they turned a corner on the rocky path, and there was Pride walking toward them with a big smile. Much Afraid was very surprised to see him, and even more surprised when he greeted her. In the past, he had always ignored her, with his nose tilted in the air. "Well, Cousin Much Afraid, here you are at last. I've been trying to catch up with you." Of course, she should have known better than to stop and speak to one of her relatives from the valley. But it made Much Afraid feel good to have the handsome young man actually wanting to talk to her after being ignored for years. "How do you do, Cousin Pride?" she asked. "Much Afraid," said Pride, taking her hand in his. "I have come to try to help you." The path was, at that point, not quite so steep, and Much Afraid had let go of Sorrow and Suffering's hands. "My dear cousin, you must quit this journey and come back to the valley with me. Do you know what will happen to you if you keep going?" all those promises the shepherd has made about taking you to his kingdom and making you live happily ever after won't come true. When he gets you up to the far parts of the mountains, he will leave you there. For the rest of your life, people will make fun of you. Poor Much Afraid. Now she tried to pull her hand free, but pride held on even more tightly. She had chosen to listen to him, and now it would be very hard to get away. Besides, hadn't she been secretly thinking those same thoughts? What if the shepherd didn't keep his promises? What if people did make fun of her for believing him? She hated what pride was saying, but with him holding her hand so powerfully, it was easy to believe his words. Go back, Much Afraid, he urged. Give it up before it's too late. What is up there that could be worth this difficult journey? I am looking for the kingdom of love. The shepherd will make my feet like Hinds' feet, and I will run, and I will leap on the high places, she whispered. You, he sneered. Don't you know how ugly and deformed you are? Why, even in the valley no one loves you. How can you expect to live in the kingdom of love? They say nothing but beauty can live there. Come on, be honest with yourself. Turn back with me before it's too late. Poor Much Afraid, the desire to turn back was almost overpowering at that moment. Pride held her tightly, and his words sounded so true. But then, in her heart, she saw the shepherd. She remembered the look in his eyes when he said, here, you can be looking at this, so I'll do this. She remembered the look in his eyes when he said, remember my promise to bring you to the high places and to make your feet like Hinds' feet. And I promise that you will receive a new name. Before Pride could realize what was happening, who came to the rescue? Much Afraid cried out, come to me, shepherd, come quickly. There was the sound of loose rattling stones and a great leap, and the next moment the shepherd was on the path beside them. His eyes were flashing, and his shepherd's staff was raised high above his head. He brought the staff down on Pride, who immediately dropped Much Afraid's hand. Off he ran down the path and around the corner, slipping and stumbling on the stones as he went. The shepherd's voice was gentle but firm. Much Afraid, why did you let Pride take your hand? If you had been holding the hands of your two helpers, this would never have happened. She looked at the shepherd for a long moment. Then, for the first time, of her own free will, Much Afraid held out both of her hands to her helpers. Sorrow and suffering seemed even more painful friends now, but she held on to them tightly and turned to continue her journey to the high place. So that is the end of chapter 2. Who do you think Pride is? Have you ever been proud? Pride is the thing in us that wants to do what we want to do, not what God wants. Pride says, I don't need God or anyone else. Pride says, me, me, me. Pride worries about what other people think more than what God thinks. The opposite of pride is humility. Humility says, I need God's help. All right, we are done chapters 1 and 2, and I will see you tomorrow for the first part of chapter 3. I love you.